We get started.
We spread out with the good ones.
Yeah. COVID cluster over there.
Engineers socially distancing since the 50s. All right. I believe we have enough folks to get started, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the December 2nd meeting of the Municipality of Anchorage Board of Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals. Tan, would you be so kind as to do a roll call?
Certainly. Mr. Straight.
Present.
Mr. Fredine.
Present.
Mr. Cowling.
Present.
Mr. Boney.
Present.
Mr. Can is unavailable tonight, and so is Mr. Sobolewski. I have not heard from Mr. Loken. Mr. Kunder. Present. Mr. Vinoy.
Present.
And another new member is Mr. Veridat, but he has not responded to let me know whether he's coming or not. And that is staff, and you now, or not staff, you have the board, and you have a quorum.
Okay.
And for staff, Mr. Nofsinger.
Present.
Mr. Fosberg.
Present.
Mr. Dova.
Present.
Mr. Hickle.
Present.
Mr. Harvey.
Present.
And Mr. Thompson.
I'm here.
And staff.
Is everybody else on?
Oh, and we need, we have members online. If you could unmute and tell us who you are. Mr. Lamb.
Hey, Josh Lamb, organizer, UA Local 367, plumbers and steam fitters.
Thank you.
Is Drumlin on?
No. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we get rolling, can I get the members of the public in the room to introduce yourself as well?
Art Minard, Anchorage Fire Department.
Again, brief introduction.
Right now, we're an instructor with Local 367, plumbers and steam fitters.
Ben Dunham, instructor with Local 367, plumbers and steam fitters. Excellent. Thank you very much. Would like to welcome our new members we have with us today. Would you do a favor and please introduce yourself, just let the rest of us know.
I'm Dan Benoit. I own Benoit Electric. We're based out of Austell, Alaska. Do a lot of residential and commercial work in Anchorage. I've been on a couple of code adoption committees with Eric Cowling in the past, and do a lot of jobs with Keith Soborowski, and he had mentioned that this spot was available, and so I said I was interested in see if I could be of any assistance.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thanks.
And Mr. Kunder.
Mr. Kunder?
Yes,
Could you just briefly explain how you came to be on the board and what you do?
I'm cover contracting and consulting. I'm an electrical contractor in Anchorage, commercial, residential, industrial. I heard through friends that there was an opening and Pat was asked to join, and I like being involved in the building part of this, so I thought I would do my best to offer my services.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you joining our board. All right. Next up is approval of the agenda. I entertain a motion to approve our agenda as presented.
Move to approve.
I'll second. All right. Any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, let's just go ahead and say all those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. How about approval of minutes from our previous meeting on November 18th? I'd like to entertain a motion of approval. Anybody who does not have a mouthful of sandwich?
Mr. Cowling, you want a motion?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to fix my link still.
I'll do so.
What, you need me to motion what?
Would you like to second for approval of the minutes from our previous meeting?
Yes, I would. I would like to second that.
Excellent, thank you. Discussion. One item I would like to note, previous meetings state that the board made official the unanimous non-support for provision section 7 on residential audits and section 25. Our recollection is we discussed those briefly, but we did not state an official position on either of those.
Oh, on 7?
On 7 and 25, I do not recall a motion or taking any official action of non-support on those items.
Okay, we can take that off.
Anybody, please correct me if you remember differently. All right, any other discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion as amended for our minutes of the previous meeting, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. We have no new business, so we will move past that, which brings us to old business, which is our review of the omnibus ordinance that has been proposed on Title 23, providing clarity for implementation of code and related matters. As a brief overview of where things stand, in our previous meeting, we went through and discussed several items and made several official recommendations. Items that are remaining to discuss. Item number 3, which increases the cost limit, the dollar limit required before a building permit is required. Item 5 pertaining to temporary structures. Item 6, 10, and 12 pertain to residential fee permit reductions. Item 24 on ADU separation. Item 26 on ADU STC ratings. Item 19 on air admittance valves. Item 7 pertaining to residential plan review audits, and item 25 pertaining to residential hot roofs. I would like, yes, sir.
Hot roofs, we pulled that last week. I agreed that we were pulling that, it was no longer necessary.
Okay.
And you guys did deal with approving that decision. If I remember right. So
I think you're correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, I had that one written down.
Okay, I recall you saying it was being pulled, but weeks ago, we had something less since then. Okay. We will not be discussing hot roofs. I would, before we dive into this, has there been any update on any of these items, any change to the proposed ordinance, any official action on that?
Yeah, I would say that in some discussions this week, maybe Ross, you have that written down, which ones we decided to pull.
Yeah, so I guess, we probably start off with number 3 anyway, but we decided to pull number 3, which was the change in the valuation thresholds for when permits are required.
It would affect losing too many. The reason why we pulled it is moving to $10,000 would negatively do what we were trying to accomplish. What we were trying to accomplish is make sure that we're keeping, in talking with the lead structural inspector, he said that a lot of re-roofs came in between $5,000 and $10,000 in our permit scheme, and it wasn't intended. We thought it would be that they were higher. He said no, it would eliminate a lot of them, and that's not what the intent was. The intent was to try to eliminate the things that aren't being done at that level anyway. And so we don't really need to change it. It doesn't affect any change. So we administration agreed with the lead structural inspector that it would be detrimental to the permitting process to eliminate some of those permits. So we're fine with leaving the value at 5,000 on both those items. So.
Okay. Any other items revised or changed?
What's that?
Any other items revised or changed, or are we good to go for the rest, for discussing the rest?
If you want to go down, there was the one on the 1 hour. 26.
Yes, that is
Number 24.
item. I got to wait again, there's some stuff. Yeah, that is item 24.
Item
220.
24, we have pulled that as well. Suggestion to pull that. We're not going to put that forward. It's not needed. It's not necessary. The IRC committee already, they just put that in last fall, and leaving that language in, actually, Ross pointed out, it would be better to clarify how to handle those per code than it would be if that language wasn't there, because the code would be silent and we don't want it to be silent. So leaving it in is the same effect that we were trying to get. Ross just pointed out that it's clear that it's not, it's better to leave it in for clarity than is to take it out. So we're good with leaving it as in and pulling it out of this ordinance.
Okay.
That's the only one that's pulled.
I think so. I think,
The rest
the rest are open.
The rest
for
we can go
discussion.
through one by one talking about, and as we go through them, I can tell you what our position is on those.
All right. Thank you. That helps a lot. It leaves us with 5 topics to discuss. And I don't believe we're scheduled till midnight this time, but our intention is not to go that long. All right. First off, I would like to start with going back and discussing the air maintenance valve items, because I know we have several members from public here who are here to talk on that topic specifically. I would like to ask Mr. Burdine to kick off the discussion on this topic.
Okay, so we have been working on the verbiage on this particular one and kind of honing it down a little bit more.
And to clarify, when you say we,
I met with Local 637 as per our last meeting. I said I was going to meet with them and kind of walk through the current verbiage on what we have, and then talk. And then also, I've received some emails back from the UPC committee on an updated version of this that kind of helped define the exceptions. And so the UPC committee has also been providing input on the draft since the last one. Mr. Nossinger and also sent in some comments. Before the meeting, Mr. McCann called me to talk about the air admittance valves, and as you know, he's not here tonight. He asked for some more time to review this current version of it. And we also, when I was at Local 637, they have testing setups on how to plumb sinks and dishwashers and whatnot. And they would like to do a little bit of testing to see how those things actually work in reality. A couple of the sticking points have been dishwashers and where those are going to be allowed, because dishwashers, especially hooked up with garbage disposals, that line tends to get plugged. And when your dishwasher kicks on and starts putting out pump waste into your system, that will end up, if the air admittance valve's under the counter, a failure that has been seen in the past has been where all the water starts coming out that air admittance valve rather than above the floor, above the sink rim. And so that is an issue that we're still trying to figure out. And then also whether or not a water closet, the current units have enough air intakes to handle water closets. So long story short, we're exceptionally close, but I think we need another 2 weeks just to get this verbiage and to allow Mr. McCann, the board member, to also review this documentation and then just make sure we have all our final ducks in a row on that last verbiage, which I don't know if we're going to get done tonight anyways. So, but I can, and then that'll allow me to get that verbiage out to you guys, to the rest of the board, for you guys to review before making any official actions. That's my request, is 2 more weeks, which is becoming a record, or not a record, or something I keep saying.
broken record.
Yeah, broken record.
Could you summarize the state of where the proposal sits now, what areas they would be accepted in, or proposed to be accepted in?
Yes. So in previous versions, we had an allowed situation for any renovation. And that had some pushback by the UPC committee saying that was too broad of a option. So we took that one off. So right now what we have is we have two scenarios where these would be allowed in Anchorage. One of them is an island vent, which I think you're all familiar with. You know, in your kitchen you have an island in the middle of your kitchen where there would be a sink or something like that there, and that's considered an island vent scenario. That's probably the most common use for these air admittance valves. So that is one scenario that we have allowed is for an island fixture. The exception that we were dealing with is whether or not if there's a dishwasher also in that island, if you can use an air admittance valve, and that's currently right now that's a no. So that is one scenario. The other scenario on that is if you have up to 4 fixture units, which you guys are all experts in the plumbing code, I'm sure. So what that means is basically a sink and a dishwasher, or a sink and a floor drain, or a sink and a floor sink. If that is more than 30 feet horizontally away from another fixture, so basically that is trying to figure out where is the economical break point of, just go up in the ceiling and run a vent. Do it the old-fashioned way. That was 30 feet. It's 30 feet horizontal, not vertical, because the typical installation issue that we run into where the air admittance valves would be beneficial is if you are on a first floor and there is a second floor with a different tenant or a different owner above you, you can't run a vent up through there, or you don't want to run a vent up through another tenant space above. So that is the second scenario with a 30 fixture unit, or excuse me, a grouping of plumbing fixtures up to 4 fixture units more than 30 feet away from another plumbing fixture or a vent line, an existing vent line. The exception on that, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but the other exception on that is a water closet. And the concern is that the air admittance valves, because you can theoretically with 4 fixture units get a flush valve toilet with a lavatory with 4 fixture units. And the concern is that this little tiny thing with the little tiny vents around it can admit air fast enough for a water closet to go without blowing the trap of the lavatory, which is the whole thing about the plumbing code. So, so I don't know how much more or less I can be in the weeds without being even more in the weeds on this. But anyways, that's kind of what we have. And we have a whole bunch of exceptions where we cannot do it. We still cannot do it in any place that's going to freeze. We added 2 more additional areas where you can't do it, which is anything in a firewall assembly, i.e. a wall. We don't want them in there. And then also we had the exclusion on water closets. So, but we'll get verbiage out to you guys before the next meeting so you can really geek out on all the plumbing code information you ever want to know.
Thank you for the summary. I really appreciate you leading the charge on this with UPC and with 367.
Couple of questions, Craig.
Yes, sir.
You said they're not allowed in freezing locations. What was the second criteria? Firewalls?
Well, so any sort of fire rated assembly like a wall or
Okay,
a roof.
I was going to request making a fire rated assembly because firewall means something specific.
Yeah, no, we have a fire rated assembly in the verbiage.
Thank you. The other one was, it sounds like you're trying to set up some mock tests with the union to verify how these work.
Right, so they have, at the training hall, they have sinks and everything like that their trainees practice on plumbing, sinks and everything. So they're going to set up with an air admittance valve and then I think dishwashers or something like that and just see how these things are going to react and see if there's a failure mechanism that we're concerned about, or if it works just fine, which again, these things are used in the world of the IPC, which Alaska is the world of the UPC. They are used pretty extensively in the rest of the country, but it's new to us, so we're just going to crack the door. Get used to allowing where they're absolutely needed right now versus where anybody can just go crazy. Because if you didn't know, air admittance valves will fail. And when they do fail, you will have sewer gases put into your occupied areas. So that's the concern. Potential commercials.
May. They may, doesn't mean they will.
Well, it's a mechanical device. It might be 20 years, but it's just a little rubber gasket in there. So as with all mechanical devices, they will fail. As a mechanical professional engineer, I will put my license on. All mechanical equipment fails. It might take a couple hundred years, but it's only a matter of time. It is only a matter of time.
Any other board member comments or questions?
Are we sure 2 weeks?
Again, a broken record. I think
does
so.
that have time for you guys to do this?
It does, and
Okay.
just to clarify as well, I believe that sewer vent did not have any mechanical seal as well, so.
Well, and I want to go and buy one of the Odie ones from Home Depot and look at them, because the other thing that I found since the last time we talked is there are supposed to be check valves in there that keep those things from allowing water to come back out. And that's why I want to get my eyes on that and see exactly what, that's the other part I want to follow up on.
The next 2 weeks, we've got some setup and everything else. We don't have any classes, so we've got time to do that whenever we can schedule, observe or whatever, as well as possibly check to see what kind of pressure it holds in the first place, with and without.
Okay.
Kind of give a better spectrum of what we're looking at, what we're relating to.
We're fine with that, Craig. I mean, the main reason we were hoping to try to get it done and adopted by the December 21st assembly meeting, but we can't make that if we do that, so I'll just have to bump it. It'll be a month later in January.
Does it have to be
It
submitted by a certain
doesn't
time?
have to be anything. So the main reason why we wanted to do this is because we got fees that are associated within this document, right? When there are fees, it's much easier to do on January 1 than it is after the fiscal year starts. But we can handle it and address it. I'm not worried about it. I'm just, the want was one thing, but I think that what you guys are doing outweighs that. So I'm good with that. I'd love to be a part, be able to, as a mechanical engineer too, I'd love to come see that and see what we're talking about there. So I mean, please schedule, I mean, Ross is a mechanical, we have quite a few mechanicals on staff. So I mean, it'd be nice to come over and take a look at that as well. So if you can keep us aware of that and timing, just be aware that we really would like that 2 week, hopefully we'll get through everything else tonight. I think it will be, should be, but that one, then we can come back real quick and do a quick meeting.
Okay. Is that something, I mean, is the whole air admittance valve something that can be done a building official policy separately of this?
No, I don't believe it would be. It would have been done that way if the Ross.
Since it's currently not code compliant, it cannot.
Yeah, it can only be handled by alternate means and methods. I mean, you can put a policy that says, oh, if you do it this way, it'll always be approved, but it still have to be done by alternate means and methods without this language, I think, so.
Yeah, I think that would be pushing the point of us creating regulation if we tried to allow via policy.
Okay.
Yeah. The whole point is when you change code like this, it needs to be done in code, not by, policy is supposed to be only done by clarifications of code, not changes of code or adding things in.
The other thing that I'll shut up so we can go on. The other thing is I would like to request to be able to create a handout that goes along with this to explain why we did what and what the issues were, so that at least at the next code review cycle.
I don't know if we need a handout, but what you're saying is create a document like in the code committee meetings that documents that, put it in a code committee book. Is that what you're talking about?
At the least, yeah. I wasn't sure if a handout, since air admittance valves are a new thing
I mean,
for
we can do a
Anchorage
handout for
contractors.
sure to show where they work.
Some additional help.
Handouts, typically what we put them out for is for help it, fix it guides, whatever for the layman out there that, so they know what and how to do something that's maybe not super clear, and we detail that. I mean, I don't have a problem doing that if we think we need that. I think, I saw your email about the documentation, and I think the documentation is good to keep, and I think everything that you're doing as part of it is probably being kept through TANA or the final decision will be, so.
Just real quick, we do have a handout that shows basically the illustration of an island mounting. That probably would be a good idea, just provide some basic information and distances and where it would be allowed. I think that would be very helpful.
Work on that, and I'll work on that next week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, before we move on, I do want to give the public members a chance. Anything else you'd like to add on this topic?
I think it's pretty well covered by board member there. I think we understand pushing it back 2 weeks, giving us a chance to set up our test assemblies and get some visual on it.
This is what code development should be about. We've done it several times on other things, so I really like to see it on the mechanical realm of things. So I really appreciate you guys doing that. We dealt with garage floors a long time ago with SBS. They built a model and we went and tested it, and it's been a lot. So to me, this is, I mean, it's great to see this. If they work, right? If they don't, we'll see that, and we'll be able to really document something. And so that will make these type of decisions easier for the board, I think, in 2 weeks. So I'm happy to see this go on, and I'm willing to have no problem with moving the select or taking this to the assembly a few weeks down the line.
I would request through Mr. Burdine, if you would, when you do have that mock up set, if you could extend an invitation to the board as well as staff. More folks we can get eyes on this thing, the more confident we'll be. Yeah, I'm not sure how many of us will show up, but it'd be good to have the option.
I think you got to watch, because you can't have more than 3 of the board members there at one time, or 2. So yes, you can extend it, but what I'm saying is multiple members of the board can't be there at the same time, because it would be considered a non-advertised meeting. So just, if we do that, just make sure that we stagger that. Tana would have probably brought that forward, but just to make sure you guys know that. And that's something good to probably pass on to the new board members is when you're meeting on building board business or topics that might be discussed at the building board, you can't meet outside of the meeting with more than, more than 2 members at a time to talk about that topic. So I just want,
and if you do talk about
that most people don't realize that boards and commissions are under those same type of rules as like these.
All right, and if you do talk about it, send an email to myself and the rest of the board so they know that what you're talking about, so that you know that they know everything is open.
Thank you for that clarification.
And I know how much you guys are just waiting to watch.
To watch
the toilet.
I can't quite give you a solid answer, but I would think that we should be able to set it up at a couple different times or a couple different days, even possibly at the same time, accommodate whatever you guys need, as long as you guys can coordinate who's where and when.
And I can just record it on my phone too, as well. And we can set up a Dropbox and you guys can go look at it, or make it part of the public record of us videotaping plumbing. Yes, we'll make it available for the rest of the board to make sure you guys are also comfortable with how we're proceeding forward.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Straight?
Yes, sir.
Derek? I was hoping I could ask Craig about the valve. I'm looking at it on the internet on how that it's configured, made, and how it installs. I can't tell, but it looks like you can replace them easily. That you just reverse thread them out, and you can screw in a new one, or are they glued in place?
They are threaded, so yes, that is the intent as a mechanical device, that they can be unscrewed and then a new one screwed in place. And part of the requirements of code, as well as in our amendment, requires them to be accessible, be located in an accessible area that can be replaced. And then also it notes in our write-up, which is different than the IPC's write-up, that anything that's installed in a wall has a grill that is large enough to be able to remove the device through the grill and replace it.
Okay. And to test it, I don't see any, I see that it has a little movable flap inside and a rubber gasket around it. Can you just move it with your finger or what? Or it doesn't look like you can get inside of it to test it.
I don't know how you would test it. I mean, I think you would know it failed when you smell sewer gases, I guess.
Oh, okay. That's the smell test. Okay. Yeah.
Well, yes. But you guys,
I was just thinking, because the two that we showed you for a demonstration, one was glue or thread, the other was strictly glue, so that might need to be a variation that you put in there. If there are to be replaceable, they are thread only.
okay.
The glue ones could be modified with a glued adapter or a threaded adapter, so they can be changed.
And also with the testing, part of it was gonna be, we have our P-trap there to see if it actually would suck the P-trap out or anything else. We can actually get visual on that. Because like a water closet requires a 2-inch vent. The question is, does air admittance valve, Studer vent, whatever you wanna call it here, does it allow that same amount reorable and stuff to drive the P-trap?
We'll test that.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
All right, we do also have Mr. Lamb on the line for 367. Want to make sure you have a chance to comment on this topic before we move on. Anything about?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to talk. It sounds like Jason Fernandez pretty well got it covered.
All right. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and do we need
Move the table.
nothing? We have a motion to table. Table this topic until our next meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of tabling this, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, item number 19 has been tabled until our next meeting.
19.
Section number 19. Okay. That leaves us with 4 items by my count. Quick review, there's item on section 5 on temporary structures, section 6, 10, and 12 on residential permit fee reductions, section 26 on ADU STC ratings, and section number 7 on residential audits.
Do we have one?
Pardon?
Oh, the hot roof is being taken out, sorry.
Do we have a preferred order in one of these that has more conversation than the other that we want to start on first? Are you here for one of these specifically?
No.
Okay. Then in that case, how about if we dive into temporary structures, section number 5. Mr. Thompson, will you give a summary of this item?
Temporary structures, for some reason, I talked with Ross and several other people on the staff. Don't really know why it was limited to certain occupancies. And so they're temporary, they're good for 6 months, and then you can get one-time extended to 12 months. We ran into several things during COVID discussions with Bob Dole, past building official, and there's a need to open that up to possibilities for temporary structure other than exactly those designations. And so all we did was allow it to be any occupancy depending on whatever it is. It's not a big change except for it's any occupancy except, we're left out. Did we leave out H, Ross? Like no H's, or did we let all?
Well, we just deleted the whole
We
occupancy.
deleted the item because there was no reason to limit a temporary structure. It could be anything that you might need for a short period of time, no matter what. it's gone in 6 months or 12 months at the worst case if they get an extension. So for us, we collect a bond for that temporary structure, cash only. And so people are motivated to at least come back and get that money back, the cash back. So we just wanted to eliminate that as being a problem when people called up and if they didn't have that exact occupancy, trying to, it's been exercised and been done. All this was catching it and legalizing the building official's ability to do it, even though it's been done over the course of, you know, when I was 30 years, they've been using different occupancies. I think people just didn't notice it, and I noticed it recently when there was a request for type of building through COVID that we needed to do a temporary on. And it was like, oh my gosh, we really don't. But we used the emergency order to do it, which allowed the emergency to get away from having to meet it. And therefore, we figured we'd fix it here in this code cycle, or in this code fix. So I think it's pretty minor. Everybody seems pretty much okay with it when I'm talking.
Thank you. Board comments, questions?
Just have one clarification question. Does this still go through the normal permitting process?
Well, there's a defined process for temporary building permits, and it goes through that process, absolutely.
And then I guess you mentioned H occupancy. That's the only thing I'm concerned about with the H's.
It's still to meet all of the separations, all of the requirements. Really what temporary buildings get away from is a lot of the zoning requirements and how they, but for the building itself, they end up having to meet all of the scenarios, I believe, that the building, it says right in there that it meets the building code, so we end up having to address all of those items.
Does that include the full structural design as well?
Yes.
Is there a need, I mean, H's are such a touchy thing. You know, especially if we're getting out of zoning and you put it right next to a daycare or something like that. Is there any specific need why we would?
They'd have to meet all the same requirements, whether it was permanent or not, just as a temporary for that. The issues is they wouldn't have to meet that. They wouldn't have to meet the zoning requirements, I believe, across it. I think I'm answering that correctly. I don't think there's, the building code says part of the temporary requirement says it'll meet the building code. I think besides the foundation, maybe that's the only thing that we deal, but we have to deal with all the seismic, all the hold downs, all of the fire department. Every temporary that I've done, we've had to deal with all the hydrant issues, all of those issues and separations and distances. So I believe that.
For one thing, H occupancies, excuse me, through the chair, are extremely rare. We probably don't even permit one H occupancy a year. And if we ever did get an H occupancy as a temporary building, I think between the building department and the fire department that we could regulate it appropriately, locate it appropriately, put the proper safeguards in place and all that. As a temporary building, it only gets to be there 180 days. There's a bunch of land use regulations on them too that I'm not totally familiar with that may actually limit some of this too anyway. But if we ever did get an H occupancy as a temporary building, I think we would put it in our Outlook calendars when that 180 days is up and let them know that they're done. But anyway.
So I got a question.
Go ahead.
Looking at the code section of temporary structures may be erected without meeting all the requirements for permanent structure, provided they meet the following conditions. And there's A through J. You know, right now it's limited to group A, B, M, and U. Question here is group R occupancies. Looks like now you can do it as a temporary structure. And I don't see a whole lot here where that says, you know, right now, you know, group R occupancies under the building code and fire code requires by a sprinkler system. Looks like here I don't see anywhere that it says they exempt sprinkler cost of fire alarm for that building. Under this section, because.
I mean, every temporary I've done, we've had to meet the fire code, so.
Yeah, I'm just kind of
So
raising
the fire
caution
code says
here.
if it's gotta be sprinklered, it'd have to be sprinklered. I would say to do it temporary, and it'd have to meet the requirements of all our occupancy have to be sprinkled. So the only one that I know I was talking to somebody about with regard to COVID was talking sprinklers, so I don't
Yeah.
know exactly.
I mean, you know, A, it's a temperature structure limited group, A, B, U occupancies. B is the size of structure shall not exceed 1,500 square feet or be more than 1 story in height unless approved by the building code officials.
Yeah, so these are small.
They're typically small, but you know, you may run into that situation where somebody tries to throw a temporary R out there, you know, that could turn into, you know, where we need some fire protection systems in it. You know, because we are talking sleeping room, you know, facilities now.
There are self-contained sprinkler or fire suppression systems too. That not necessarily prohibitive, that they don't necessarily have to plumb it, but
Right.
there's other alternatives.
The top one in there is storage. I mean, there's no storage right now. It's like, obviously, a lot of people create storage for a short period of time while they're building a building. So those other occupancies, we don't get any. I mean, I could see maybe the possibility one, but it has to meet, you guys would review it and approve it only if it met the requirements of the fire code. So they'd be subject to doing that and meeting that regardless. So I don't see it as a big.
I just look at it the way that what's written, that it doesn't need to meet the requirements of the permanent structure, it meets all those other requirements that are there.
That language is for meeting the Title 21 code, which if it's not a permanent structure, you don't have to put landscaping and drainage and all of those things in for a temporary structure. That's what helps save. It's all the language intertwines in a lot of things. I mean, I don't see it as that we would get a non-code compliant building. It's just, we get maybe a couple of these a year, Ross, a couple temporaries a year, maybe.
I mean, the most common temporary is like your little used car sales lot building.
Right. Which I don't see a problem in that. It'll just be if we get to anything that's, you know, sleeping in it.
The fact that they only get them for 180 days really limits their usefulness.
And the cost prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive to do a lot of things for that short period of time. So they're usually using them for interim while they're building something else or designing something else, or planning or building something somewhere else on another lot while they're getting there. So
So would it be wise to say except for bar and high occupancies?
what?
Would it be wise to add in there except for bar and high occupancies?
I mean, probably never seen, but I mean, it doesn't hurt. I'm not saying I would be against that.
Would that be COVID RNIs?
What's that?
COVID eyes for institutional for hospitals?
Well, you gotta remember the COVID stuff, most of it is exempt under the emergency orders, so it doesn't have to meet any of the codes. It does, fire department has the play in that, they get to go see it, but it exempts kind of all this Title 21 and doesn't exempt the building code, but it gives the authority to the fire department in the emergency order aspect of those type of structures. But you know, we found a hole in the code trying to clear it up, make it simple, and I don't think putting more language in is necessary, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just don't think it's really necessary.
Just my mind is thinking here of things here. How does the construction trailer, is that exempt?
That's exempt. They're exempt as job shacks.
Okay, that's written in somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was just wondering. Thank you.
Any further discussion, board comments, questions? right, I'll entertain a motion on how to address this. Somebody wants to take a stab at it?
How? Can I see a copy of how it's written?
The official word?
Yeah.
Find on that first page, section 5. We've been referring to these by section numbers
Right.
for documentation.
So I'll make a motion to approve section 5 as written with the qualification of adding a requirement that this does not, would not be permitted for RI occupancies.
I have a motion. I'll second that. Second discussion.
Do we want to add H in that just for dudes?
Inclined not to, for all things he can handle this thing from the last guy.
I don't know, from my perspective, if you're gonna exclude R and Is, you might as well do H's too, you know. Yeah.
Or just add S in there and be done.
Or the other, the other approach would be to just add S in there. To the original, keep the original language and just add S as an occupancy that's allowed as a.
What about an E for?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, E for educational? You know, we already have those, the relocatable classrooms. They have their own whole ordinance to address those.
They're not considered temporary though,
Yeah,
they're moving around,
they're like pre-approved buildings that move from school to school as they need them, and they're set up. Yeah, they're their own beast.
I propose that we don't put any limitations on this. We leave the verbiage as is, because as it sounds to me, any occupancy that gets proposed is going to have to meet the same requirements. It's going to have sprinklers. I don't know why somebody would want to do that, why they want to go through with the temporary R.
Well,
But
the reason
I
I
don't
threw
see
it out is so we could discuss it, so, yeah.
I agree.
No, I'm happy, so.
I agree. I don't think we should limit it. It seems to me that if you owned a fairly decent sized lot, your house burned down, you might want to have a temporary R structure put on the lot on a different corner while they're rebuilding your house. Is that not a use that we would use this?
Well, if it was an IRC structure, it wouldn't, single family, it wouldn't be exempt anyhow. It wouldn't drive sprinkler in there.
What's the worry exactly about using this for residential?
I think you could see if you got somebody that wanted to put almost like a 3-unit apartment in there temporarily, or an assisted living in there, you could run into some issues with that.
Now, the issue thinking of would be issues on behalf of that person to meet the building code, or issues?
Issues that would, the way it's kind of written here is it would exempt them if they moved in there and put a sprinkler in or a fire alarm system if it was required.
My understanding for the previous discussion is it would not exempt them, they would still have to meet.
Well, there's specifically, there's like say A through J items that met those. It does not have to meet the requirements of a permanent structure, which is written in the main body of the code.
Zach, could you speak to that? Would that exempt it from a fire?
I don't believe there's any exemptions from the fire code with regard to temp structures. They gotta meet it. Everyone I've ever permitted or walked through, the fire department went through every aspect of it. If it was large enough, it needs sprinklers. Usually they're small enough to not require it, but nobody's come through with an R temporary use structure, so it doesn't mean that they wouldn't. But to me, I would say fire would say it need to be sprinklered and they'd have to sprinklers. That's the way I would read it right
Well, what
now.
I read here, Ron, is on the item A, temporary structures shall be limited to group A, B, M, and group E occupancy. In the code section.
That's what it said. This code
This
just
is what we're
takes
trying
that
to
out. That's-
Right, but that,
allows
now
it.
that opens it up then to Rs and Is and everything. By doing that, where
Then they
before it
meet-
was
then they meet
prohibited,
the code.
before it was prohibited, but in the main body of the section here, says temporary structures may be erected without meeting all the requirements for permanent structure, provided to meet the following requirements, A through J below. That's the concern is, you can end up with one of these potentially and things go. We don't have to do sprinklers or any fire protection.
I don't know the fire code being met because every project we've done has to meet the fire code. We did an A occupancy with alcohol in it. As per the code in a temporary structure, fire department would probably require that's in the code 5,000. I believe the code is very clear that all of the aspects, it's just not considered a permanent building for a little bit different foundation. It allows them to do less drainage, nose, landscaping, all the other things. It seems to me like it's a very simple clarification that we're not just specifying it to 3 occupancies or 4, that we're allowing more if they want to, but most will choose never to do anything. So I think it's perfect as written and there's no safety problems at all, but that's my opinion.
If you guys want, I can go back to the office and print off a copy of the section if you guys want to review the whole section.
I'm kind of trying to read it online here. I would concur that sure, it kind of dances around.
It dances around the administrative code, just to let you know. The administrative code usually never comes to the building board, correct? All the code bodies, IBC, IRC, all those, typically, this gets always put in with the building code. We're now letting, and we're talking about it, but normally the administrative code is up to the administration to set, and we write the code, and we administer the code, and you guys deal with the code. Does that make sense? This is in the administrative code, and so normally, that's why it's never been sat and discussed at the whole before, because it's always been handled administratively in the administrative code. And that's several of these things that we're going to talk about tonight are all in the administrative code that the administration gets to set on how to administer the code, not the code. And so we're arguing about not the code here. We're arguing about how to administer the code. And my view is normally, the administration is allowed to administer the code the way that the administration does. We're talking about it, and I understand that, it's fair it's kind of different in this case that you guys are addressing something that the building board has never usually addressed. Because the administrative code usually doesn't. It never goes through code committee. It never goes to, it's written by the administration and usually put forward. I want to at least make sure everybody realizes that this code section and several others that we're talking about tonight are usually always written as never part of the code committee process.
Since Sharon Walsh, it has been an admin, been in the code committee, just so you know. Then she put through the administrative code through a board committee.
Process.
Well,
That's not.
I would say whether the code committees do it or not is one thing, but I would argue that the building board does have oversight over the administrative code because it is part of Title 23, which the building board has oversight basically over all of Title 23.
would also note that the assembly gave it to us since they know nothing about Title 23. So at least if we're having discussions about it, we're more knowledgeable about this than the assemblies. So that would be the counterpoint, is they gave it to us to do our due diligence. But your point is made, or is a good point there as well.
Craig, what were you looking up there?
So this section in here said, temporary uses and structures shall comply with AMC 210508. And that's what I was trying to find online, is exactly what was that. And, there's a section, and I don't even know if this is the right one, because it doesn't even have this specific verbiage in there.
So that's the land use regulations for temporary structures.
That's chapter 21.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm looking in the wrong one. So that's 21. So is there an overriding, is this the sole verbiage that's Title 23 regarding?
No,
that's
there's
just
much
one.
more to the.
That's just one piece that says you gotta go deal with that section in planning, in Title 21, as well as all the other sections. And there's specific exemptions in Title 21 that are exempt for doing certain things for temporary structures. They have their own section, we have our own section. This section basically is, it's like I said, it's either, I think it's good as written. You guys, I don't care if you add them in or not, we just need to get past it and move on. Because at the end of the day, the code is pretty clear. Every temporary building comes in and gets a full building, structural, seismic, mechanical, electrical review, and fire review. There is nothing, that process is the same regardless of if it's a permanent building or not. The issues with regard to the statement in there have to do with when you don't say it's permanent and it's allowed to be called temporary, then there's a bond that's required, there's a limit to that, and there's no zoning, no plan, no landscaping, no road development, the section you're talking about is a much bigger section for, that is incredible savings for people to be able to do a temporary building. But we're talking 180 days with the possibility of 180-day exemption. And I believe that right now, every temporary building goes through the full review, full code analysis, regardless of what occupancy it is. It's only been limited to those 3 or 4 at this point. And the main thing that we're trying to do is clean it up, make sure that S occupancy got in there, but at the same time, we didn't see the other ones ever being a problem because the code covers them. So why limit them at all?
We do it one of 2 ways. Either we can get a motion in a second, call for the vote, or withdraw the motion and propose another one. If we're going to call for vote, I'm going to vote against it because I think that the R and the I would be covered with the other sections that would require some kind of fire suppression system of some type, maybe free, self-contained. But I don't see a reason why, if somebody wants to go that direction, I don't see a reason.
I missed a word. Section 5 as written, adding.
To exclude R and I occupancies.
I could entertain a friendly amendment for 1 second.
Yeah, I will move to have a friendly amendment to strike the exceptions from that statement.
That's one way to do it. That's acceptable to the first. So.
I second that.
You're third in.
All right, so that was to
As written.
agree with section 5 as written. The board to recommend section 5 as written. I'm sure it's up there. All right, any further discussion? All right. Tanner, would you call for questions? We'll talk about this one.
Mr. Straight?
Aye.
Mr. Fradine?
Aye.
Mr. Cowling,
Aye.
Mr. Boney,
Aye.
and Mr. Vanoy.
Aye.
5.
All right. Shall we take a brief break? And we've been here a few minutes. So brief bathroom break. We'll reassemble at 10 till and dive into section 6, 10, and 12 on residential permit fee reductions.
I don't think so.
Donna, how many minutes did they say?
5.
5? Okay, thank you.
We're timing you.
I'm on board. That's
More than just improvements.
no, we didn't.
The crowd. All we're doing is changing the best way to do that. And to make it stop. All of our specialists. Stop results for your activities.
There's like 2 or 3 sections to come out. And they all have the same language on them.
I kind of wish Mr. Wentz was here. He was probably, he's not here tonight, so he would have been able to bring back the board to the assembly to discuss. Yeah, are you bringing up summaries that are kind of, well, I guess they have minutes, but they're really good.
No, and on the same note, I don't know if we gave them our final yes, no's, and then a backup document. I don't know if they would do that. I think that'd be valuable.
That might be a question. I think I got something.
Thank you, yeah.
I thought we needed something different.
What do you think, the mayor?
We would have to go back to Sullivan. Because we had to write letters saying that we provided food for our board meetings and explain why and so forth, what and so forth. So Mr. Hercalis and Mayor Sullivan at that time said, oh, you guys got really good explanation. You can go ahead and feed your boards.
So they get cranky when they're hungry. They disagree with everything we want to do. Cranky. More than usual.
Do you guys remember Mr. Kniefel? Bob Kniefel?
Came across his contact on my phone the other day. It's still there.
Yeah, he would, when he would have something before the assembly, would always cook them dinner. They never had to be ordered. He said, I will cook the dinner. I will prepare everything, straight down from appetizer to dessert
For the assembly.
for the assembly. Yep.
I know architects who would go to interviews with fresh baked goods.
I never tried that. That's too close to bribery.
Especially if this was like her special homemade cookies or something.
I'll do it too. You meet. after I got the job, battling it out.
I don't know, if you had the 1 o'clock slot, you might want to bring caffeine, like, hey, free Red Bull to everybody, so you don't fall asleep in my presentation.
There was a contractor. He was a head contractor.
I'd say, Craig, if you could pass on what you've got to Jason, and we'll do the same.
Okay, yeah, let us know when else you want.
Yeah, I think if you, Jason, so we can actually set it up. Do the same to maybe.
Outside of the home.
Oh, good. They finally scored.
We can follow it.
Excuse me, the Cowboys and the Saints. It's now 2-10 in favor of the Cowboys.
My brother-in-law is a Cowboys fan. I've got a standing bet with him on every Thanksgiving. He gets the Cowboys, and I take whatever the Cowboys play. And I lost. I won this year.
That's why they need tonight's win. My honey finally figured out how to split the screen. So if it's on the ESPN channels or something, actually instead of on the regular channel, we can have both games. So what I want to watch, like the Ducks, and he can watch the Seminoles or whoever, and we'll be happy. But if they're like on ABC, NBC, we can't do it.
Which one do you listen to? You can't hear them both.
No.
If we're gonna test them or not.
Listen to Monday Night Football one night at ESPN, and you've got Peyton Manning, and somebody else.
Oh, his brother.
And his brother, I think it is, and somebody else. And they're talking about everything except the game. And it's, oh, and by the way, he was just knocked out of bounds. And then they go back to their own conversations again. I go, what the hell? What's back to NBC? You know, I want commentary on the game. I don't care about you kids on how beat us.
Yeah, it's, Peyton and Eli's take on the whatever night game.
That was 12 Boys in the Lane when I listened to that for about 15 minutes, and I was enough of that noise. I tried maybe to get less commercials. No, I'd rather listen to commercials, those three.
In those scenarios, we can.
Oh, yes.
All right, our 5 minutes is about up. Let's go ahead and get started.
Gentlemen.
Three items left.
Or you get one to park and that'll do. That's what I'll do. We'll see if we can back it down and I'll just report.
We're back? Yeah, I'm watching it. We still haven't figured out Yukon TV to record.
I don't know. My wife won't let me get it yet. I'm losing channels on a weekly basis, but I'm not allowed to get anything new yet.
Let's just say if you buy an Apple TV, make sure you buy a remote that has the numbers on it and a back arrow. Because the Apple remote doesn't have anything but a frickin' dial. And you're.
But it's stylish.
Yeah, but it should be.
Yeah, but you wear out your thumb.
You're supposed to run your TV on your phone.
Yeah, if you can get it to run.
All right, returning back to our task at hand. We got items 6, 10, and 12, which all deal with residential permit fee. I don't know if reduction is even the right term, clarification perhaps. Do we need Mr. Thompson back to give a summary on this, or Ross, what's that?
Did you provide a summary on it last time?
Which one are we on? Items 6, 10, and 12. And yes, he did give a summary on it last time. Bids.
Being one that wasn't here last time, I would be very good to give the summary.
Did you bring that?
Probably the easiest way to understand it is to look at, was it number 12, where the fees changed in the fee table?
I could read it, but unless somebody else wants to read it out loud.
That's, if you're talking the red letter version, that's response to our specific concerns when we talked about this last time. I'm looking for the upfront, just summary of what we're proposing to do and why. Which I will do my best, as I recall. Previously, 40K was the limit where it transitioned from a specific number to a scaling number. And the math worked out. If you were 39,999, you got a much better deal from the permitting side, as I understood it, or the other way around. Is that, recalling that correct?
Basically, it does kind of create an inconsistency. And by getting rid of it, the fees will be calculated consistently, whether your project valuation is above or below $40,000. And the big inconsistency was if you did have a project under $40,000 at $175 for inspection, you could end up paying a significantly larger permit fee than if it would have been calculated at your valuation times the 0.009 factor with a minimum fee of $360.
Plus, the inspectors on these have to keep tracking their time and hours like they used to, and we've been trying to get away from that. This was put in as an amendment on the floor at the assembly, and we're just trying to clean that back up and work with the assembly to go back with what was actually put forward by the building department when they did the administrative code a year and a half ago. Or when was the fee done? 2 years ago, 2019. I think
Maybe just about two. Yeah.
About 2 years ago. So it's trying to clean up something for us. It'll make it easier and more. Right now, what happens is everybody's turning in valuations, for a $30,000 project at $41,000 or whatever to get the fee at 40, rather than turning it at just because they get that, and then the number of inspections don't get counted. And what we're trying to do is make it simpler, and then all the fees across the board would be similar. Because it takes more time, it takes more effort. There's no real benefit to why this changed for 40,000 and below. And so we're just trying to clean it up both for ourselves and for save lead inspectors time from counting, clerks from counting their inspections, and then rebilling at the end of the inspection when people are usually not liking to get additional fees added at the end of the closure of a permit. This will clean it up and hopefully, and the change of it and the fee value was set to make sure that the value that has been captured was really close to being captured at this 360 per permit, which is the same at the 40,000. So in average, we believe that it's a wash fee-wise. It could be, depending on projects. We don't know how many projects will come in up above or below, and so on average, though, we feel like it's a decision made to I think Ross, that the one I was talking about, that was approximately close to between 100,000 and 200,000 at worst case of cost. That's why we were talking about the 500,000 as the C that I put forward.
Yeah, I forgot to get the exact number on this one.
But the original fees that went through had this in it 2 years ago. It was taken out of the floor of the assembly. So it was calculated to be set on and be perfect for the fees that are in place today. And so we felt like it was addressed during the fees a couple of years ago, and we just wanted to clean it up because they got kind of, it's an unintended consequence of a change that was made at the floor of the assembly.
And I have no idea why the assembly changed it.
We don't know why. And we presented that to the assembly, and that's why it's in there. The people the assembly member, I believe, that made that call, I think we talked to them about that. Or Adam has, and that's why it's in here, or Bob did, one of the two of them, I didn't, but I believe that everybody's, I think the assembly and us and the industry is happy with making this move. It'll make it simpler to permit, more streamlined, easier for the inspectors, so it's a win on all sides. And no real financial loss to the city or gain to the city.
Okay, thank you.
Move to approve.
We have moved to approve, motion to approve.
I'd second that.
All right. Thank you, sir. Discussion. Any discussion we had on this? The recollections when this first came up, our concern was what you addressed, the revenue loss, but it sounds like that's not the case, and it'll be streamlined and easier for your folks to work with. So.
Really, all of this goes off the multiplier now.
Goes up the multiplier based upon the valuation. And the code deals with valuation. If there's a question, if the municipality has a question on the valuation, there's methodology in the code now to go in and the two sides sit down and use that figures to come up with that valuation. So it won't allow somebody to estimate a valuation that's wrong, but it still, at the end of the day, everything up to 40,000 will be the same permit cost. And then above that is an escalator based upon a percentage. And that's the fairest way to do it, because the small jobs do have about the same inspection as the $40,000 jobs. So we should be in good shape.
Makes sense. In theory, the inspectors are spending less time, smaller scope, they'll be in and out.
It should be, yeah. That's exactly the theory. You know, they still cost us time to get there, but they should be less length of time. So the money and the fees should still be adequate to cover.
Like it.
Mr. Kelly, do you have your hand up?
No, I didn't mean to if I did. No.
All right. Any further discussion? Questions, comments? All right. Would you call questions?
I'll call question, sorry. I'm sorry.
Do you have?
I thought I was looking at it. You were telling me. That's fine.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Vinoy?
I'm for the change.
Mr. Boney?
Aye.
Mr. Cowling?
Aye.
Mr. Fradine?
Aye.
And Mr. Straight?
Aye.
You have 5.
All right. Next up is section number 7, dealing with the residential audit.
So on that, I don't know exactly why they put a limit of 8%. My concern with limiting that, I think the building department, if we limit ourselves to auditing only at 8%, right now there's probably, I believe, probably 4 main structural reviewers for third party. And they're all doing probably about the same. So if you think about that, they're doing 25% a piece. If we run into a problem with one of those reviewers, the audit program only limits us and maxes that out, that we can only look at 8% of those projects. I think that is a problem. I think and Ross, you might be able to add why the 8% made it in there and how that, but I would think that staff and administration would rather see being able to audit as much as we want, if it's warranted based upon problems that we get. If we leave that 8% limit in there, it by law limits us. We can only look at 8% of those projects. I mean, not saying that we should have an audit program that has some kind of methodology that we will be developing that we don't. I don't, Ross, you may.
Yeah, I can clarify that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So when I wrote it, I just wrote it basically that the department shall have the authority to audit.
Right.
And simple as that. Bob felt that that wouldn't get past the Anchorage Home Builders Association.
Okay.
So Bob threw in the 8% limit.
Okay. This is what, I think that, I mean, me looking at it as head of that department, I think it's a limiting. Do you believe that, Ross, that 8% is a limit factor that probably shouldn't be in there?
Yeah, I don't think the limit should be in there. I just think it should be as simple as saying that the department can audit.
Yeah.
And we've had legal interpretations from the MOA legal department that the building official can audit whether it says you can audit or not.
Right.
But it's more helpful, it's more explicit to the industry to just say it.
Yeah. I mean, if that's my intent with it, and when I talked to Bob about it, was I just said, why are we limiting this? I don't believe we should limit it. And so I believe Ross is saying that as well. If we have to have language that says we have to do it, or we have the ability to do an audit, okay, I think we have that ability, and I don't know if we have to state that we do. There must have been a problem maybe that I wasn't aware of, that the city tried to audit and somebody said, no, you can't, or something. Did something like that happen?
Well, yeah, there are people out there who believe that because it doesn't say, because it's silent on the whole audit thing, that we do not have the authority to audit, that the whole intent of this third-party residential plan review program was MOA, you stay out of it from a plan review perspective. You know, there's people out there that believe that. So.
Yeah, I'm not one. I think we should be able to audit every single one if we had to. If we ran into problems, I think we should be able to audit every single one. I mean, not saying that we would, not saying that we do. I don't know how many that you guys have audited at all in the last year, maybe a handful. I don't think it's an abused privilege, but I think as an administrating official, I feel like it's confining to that. Maybe you have an idea.
So if I remember right, the original proposal was that went to the assembly was 15%, and the designers and the home builders had a fit about the amount of audit that could be done. And I believe the assembly amended the original proposal down to 8% when we're submitting
but I have
the meetings.
in this case, so if the home builders were the ones that you feel said that, we've presented this to the home builders and they've given us our unanimous 100% support for moving forward in the language that's there. I think it's important to do audits. I don't think they should be limiting, and that's the gist. And so hopefully you guys can support what we'd like as an administration and as the code officials. And, you know, we need to be able to have the authority and not have that limiting. If we have that limiting and then we can't go into something because we hit that 8%, I don't think we ever will, but if we did, I think it could be potentially very damaging for the municipality. We have to go fight to be able to do more than something that's listed truly and been approved by code as a limiting number. And that's all. I'm not a big fan of the limit.
Board member comments, questions?
How about 9%? How about we get it? The one thing as soon as you started talking about that kind of brought my concern up was if there was actually a specific third party that had a bad design and was consistently making the same mistake, and then you became aware of it, and that somehow protected that third party from actually getting stuff pulled because you couldn't.
I think that limiting factor of 8% would. We'd have to fight it. We probably could win that argument by justification, but I just don't think that it should be. I think that most people know that if you have a permit through us, through the municipality, and there's a mistake found, and then you find a consistent mistake in a third party, that we should be able to go look at all of those things to be safe. Because that's what we're here for, is to be safe. Not safe to 8%, save it to 100% if we have to. I mean, I don't think this administration is set, I don't think it's ever been set to go out there and do 80% of these audits. I mean, it's not, we have a lot more other things to do than do that. But I also believe that if we limit it, it kind of does not, it can be dangerous in some cases if something was abused and we were obligated to be up against that wall. That's what we're trying to get rid of. And I think that I have worked to get the people that may have wanted that 8% in there to not argue against it, be able to pull it back. So I think it's supported by everyone out there. That I don't know why it wouldn't have been before, but I think that work to get them assured that we will it won't be abused, but it won't limit us as well.
So point of clarification on this, the proposal as written eliminates item H, which says the building official may audit up to 8% of the reviews. And as has previously been noted, that's the only place the audit is discussed. So what we're doing is removing the limit and then leaving it, even though it's not said explicitly in there, it's implicit, the building official can then audit as needed. Is that the intent?
That's what I believe that we have the authority always to do. And I believe legal would say that, but, that's, Ross has a little bit of history of when this got created, more so I've come on since this was created. I believe that I'm just very strong. I feel very strongly that we don't need to be limited, and I feel very strongly that we can audit anything that's permitted through here at any time, at any level, but yet we don't have to, and it's not abused, and but it's the right thing to have, it's the right thing to not limit that.
Hey, Ron, I got a question then for you. So wouldn't it be better just to strike up to 8% of the reviews, just leave it as building official may audit reviews conducted by independent review professionals as necessary? That'd be a cleaner way to do it than lose the auditability in there, but it loses no limitation.
I'm not going to argue against it. I think it's implicit in code for everything else, but I'm not going to argue against that. That's one way of doing it. Ross, I think, kind of led to that as well. That maybe we need to have that language in there because maybe
That's where I started.
When third party came into effect, it was after I was building official before, so I never dealt with the issue as a member of the municipality. So this is me coming back in as a member, looking at some of these things, and I would have anticipated we could audit anything, we did anything, even we sent things out to third party at that time, and we can audit all of those. But we had control of all of those. Now there's this sixth system that's not really in our control. It's out to third party. The process, I dealt with it both now inside, and I've dealt with it on the outside. I think it works. I think it's a great process. But I think that if you limit it, it will lead to an abuse somewhere, and we could run into a problem. So I don't have a problem with that language at all. Leaving something in there that says it. Do I think it needs it? No, but I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, I think if we strike it to just 8%, that leaves us enforceable language versus being applied. It's all better to have enforceable language that's adopted.
What do you think the pushback on?
I think if the language was in there that just says audit period, I think that is more pushback than if we change the percentage. Than not had it in there, right?
So you're saying strike up to 8%?
No, what I'm saying is just strike it all like I put forward, because it allows us to write an internal audit process, which we have internal audit issues all the time. We can write an internal audit procedure that we can follow. But if you say you can audit, then some people take that as, well, you'll audit everything. And so that's, I think, why Ross said the 8% went in there, because they said if it just went in there as audit only, it would be argued against. Is that what you would maybe?
So Bob felt like he had to negotiate this thing. for some reason.
And that's sad. We should not, that's an issue that I don't think should be negotiated.
Because I think when Bob originally proposed it, was just we have the right to audit, and
That's the way it was originally
And then-
written.
Right, but it's never been in code either way. It never was in code that just audited. So it wasn't like moved, it was putting that in, and I think that.
and I thought you guys tried to audit one, and you got told, since it's not code and there's no code language there, you couldn't enforce an audit on a private company.
No, I mean, we have audited a few, and we're not like doing random audits. Basically, the only ones that ever get audited are the ones that have obvious issues. And, but I can see the home builder's perspective. They might feel like, oh, if we have the ability to audit, then we're just going to take over and start doing reviews again, you know, from their perspective.
Right,
That might be how they view the world. That's obvious that we don't have the resources to do that. We don't want to do that.
And that was what we heard when Bob, Chris Schutte and all that stuff were there. That's why the assembly had amended it down to 8%, because I think the percentage was higher at one point. But, you know, going down this right there.
I'd just like to see this adopted, and then we write, like any company would, an internal process to an audit process that tells us when we should or how we should or how. I just don't think it.
You want to delete H in its entirety?
Whatever's proposed, let's just get rid of the language period, and it's implicit in code that we have control of the permit. We can do anything we want with any permit that we want. And so therefore we can audit it, we can review, whatever you want to call it, audit it, review it, whatever. I think when you put the language in there that just says we can audit, that kind of gives a more of a inherent look like we're going to go audit everything. And I'd rather it just come out, we do it, and we work together with having like most businesses would on audits, is you have an internal document that tells you how you can audit whatever work you have in your system to make sure you're ensuring that you do it right, the people that submit to you do it right, the process is followed. So that's what I'm thinking.
So basically what you're saying is, okay, we're gonna, even if we left this in, Ron, and just strike the 8%, and then we can still do it the internal policy on how we audit, but this would leave code enforcement language in to allow us to audit that was adopted by the assembly. Then the internal policy would allow you to, like you say, set up procedures on how to audit and how much to audit. But
So let me reiterate as I understand it. We're proposing right now, as written, to completely strike the language on auditing, which in your opinion would then leave it implicit that the community can audit as needed. The alternative suggestion is to strike only the 8%, leaving it explicit in here that you have the authority to audit. However, that may cause pushback, where leaving it implicit does not cause pushback. Is that?
That's exactly my position.
Okay.
I don't know for that. I would say that's my opinion. I don't know how real that is. I don't know what that would be looked at, but I think that's why Bob probably started putting the language exactly like that in, and then felt like he got pushback, so then he moved it to 8%, when it probably just would have been better just to not even put it in. So I'm just trying to not put it in.
All right, I think we have a position in front of us now. I'd like board member comments. From the board, what do we think about this?
I fear that if we strike it completely, the implications of the home builders are going to feel like the first time the community decides to audit one, they're going to come unglued because they feel like they got this through where they don't have the right to audit. Even though we feel like it is implicit that we can, I think it's setting up an argument by deleting this or eliminating this explicit allowance for them to audit. It just seems like we're setting up a confrontation with them because they're going to believe that it's not something the muni has the right to do that.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask for the board to talk, and then
I just want to answer his question. We meet monthly with the home builders, and they're on board with
with,
There is
Strike
no,
it in
there
its
is
entirety.
no argument
Okay.
about removing the entire money.
further discussion?
I mean, as long as the legal wise, it doesn't have any, ramifications of not having it written in this specific place. I'll vote for either way as far as it goes, but if the home builders aren't gonna fight you on it, as far as that goes, then, it just makes it disappear versus if we were gonna have a fight, then I'd say change the 8% just to get the fight over with now and come up with something to ban, but.
I'm always up for a fight. To me, it's kind of disheartening to
We
even
need a
hear.
building official.
Well, I mean, to me, it's disheartening to even hear us modify what our personal opinions are on whether or not an organization has political power here is going to have an issue with it. To me, that's just like, we're here for public
What
safety.
warrants an audit?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
What warrants an audit? I mean, I'm new to the board, so I apologize for catching up, but what warrants an audit? What would make you want to audit somebody?
Oh, if the work has errors in it.
This, I don't know if you know, this is a third-party residential permitting exempt permit process. And with that, the muni does not do the structural or architectural review of a permit. And so that means that when it comes in for permit, it gets approved based upon third-party plan reviewers that do the work. In case of a residential, it means you have to be an architect to do the work, or plans examiner test, or you have to be a licensed stamped structural engineer to do the review. So it's any of those individuals can do the reviews, and when they come back, that's what would be audited. Their review compared with making sure that they reviewed that project correctly to meet the code.
So they would have to have already submitted something, got approved, and the inspectors found there to be a fault. In order for you to know about it.
That is typically exactly how any audit has been picked up at this point, right, Ron?
Some of them get caught when they're being submitted for review during the initial screening process.
Like
So there becomes a history with these individuals. So I do agree there shouldn't be a limit on how much you can audit them, but I mean, what's the repercussion if you have someone that keeps doing this? Does it just go to they're no longer allowed or not recognized?
And none of that actually is addressed in the code.
There's a section where you guys can prevent somebody from being a third-party reviewer. There's a line in there
Yeah,
somewhere that I read that
there's,
said that.
yeah, there is a line in there that says, like, if you show repeated incompetence or whatever, you can lose your ability to do the function, the task.
At that time, they'd be in front of the building board for appeal, I'm sure.
So,
Okay, thank you.
go ahead.
He just said,
Through my years being at the state level, when we were writing regulations for the state, the best practice was make sure you have implicit verbiage in the statute that says you're capable of doing something, and then have regulations that then are more easily modified below that then define what the statute told you could do. So I understand the process or the assumption, and with the Home Builders Association as a whole might be on board with that. But if you have one person who wants to fight it, I think having that verbiage removed opens up a court battle, and could be used in court saying you never had the authority to do this. And so I think by leaving this verbiage in place, it's going to protect the municipality and your guys' time from having to go through a court challenge, regardless of what your lawyers say. You have the authority, whoever's going to bring you to court, that lawyer's going to say, no, they don't. Pay me, and $20,000 will lose the case, but you guys have spent $20,000 in legal fees, proving you did have the authority. So I would concur the best approach would be to remove the up to 8% from this and just leave it in there explicitly. And if they want to fight,
You know, this goes through the municipal attorney before it came to.
well, I'm sure the municipal, well, I mean, honestly,
Just to
when
let you know,
when
don't
I
know
first
anything.
read this, I will be 100% on record. When I first read this, I thought it was to continue the third-party review section from before with getting rid of the whole audit process. That was the scope, that was the vision I saw when I read this, was we're getting rid of audits altogether. With my history and knowledge of everything that goes on here. So if the municipal attorney is reading this, like, well, yeah, you can do that. It's the administrative code. You have the authority to remove that stuff out of there. So, I mean, I'm not concerned that allow this. I think the clearest way is if that is the intent. It's just to get rid of the cap. I personally believe that it should actually have been modified to have a minimum of 5% of audits shall be completed. But that's definitely asking for a fight at that point. So,
Whether it's stricken or whether you guys modify it without the 8%, I can sell that to, because the safety is still the biggest issue, and that's all I care about. So.
Any further comment?
No, I'm right in line with what Craig said. My concern was the Home Builders Association on board of this because they could see this being a hole that, oh, now they don't have the ability to audit. So I prefer to make sure that the auditability is specifically mentioned and to take out the 8% cap, as Craig mentioned.
I agree with that. My first reading on this was we were getting rid of the audit. That surprised me and concerned me. I'm happy to see that's not the intent and prefer to be clear and upfront what we intend to do. On that note, I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to strike the existing H of section 7.
I second it.
Yeah, that is section 2310, 1049.
Up to 8% of.
Paragraph.
They would have to keep it
H.
and then remove up to 8% of it.
A friendly amendment on that to keep section H, but to strike that verbiage.
Do you have to specifically say what the verbiage to strike instead of
Up to
read?
8% of.
Up to 8% of.
Up to 8%, yes.
All right. I think we're clear. So Tana, would you read back what you have to make sure we're on the same page?
Okay, Mr. Benoit motioned to keep section H and to strike up to 8% of.
And to clarify, that's section 8 of the section 7 of the proposal.
Correct.
Just make sure we have all documentation lined up. Okay. Any further discussion? Piece of hands to call the question.
Second. Mr. Straight,
Yes.
Mr. Fradine,
Yes.
Mr. Cowan,
Yes.
Mr. Boney,
Yes.
Mr. Benoit.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Last item, as I see it, unless I miss something, this is all we got left, is section 26, dealing with ADU STC rating requirements. Mr. Thompson, would you give a summary of the topic?
I do want to mention just real fast, I know we talked about, and it sounds like sometimes there's negative connotations with HBA. We work with them monthly. I've worked with them on the outside and inside. They don't want things just going away. They don't want these things just look the other way. I mean, I don't know how sometimes that behavior got done. There could be a person here or there that does something, but I mean, there's sound conversations at their director meetings, in their building board meetings, and their building committees. They do a really good job of trying to help create good sound code development, and they offer solutions. And I just want to make sure that that's said, because I think a little bit of the conversation I've heard tonight, it's kind of sounded like the opposite, like they're always trying to pull something or push something over on, and that's not the case. There's some really good people there that really help us do a lot of good code development, and we continue to meet with them monthly. And I think that sometimes there might be a few cases here and there, but they really are helping in the processing of consistent code development and not always looking to try to make the cheapest house possible. It's not always that way.
Thank you for that comment.
Okay, interestingly enough, in the IRC, the requirement to do sound attenuation is not in the body of the code. It's in an appendix chapter. And because it's in the appendix chapter, it only applies if you adopt that appendix chapter, all right? So Anchorage does adopt Appendix K that requires sound attenuation. And so it's the IRC, and the IRC covers single-family homes, duplexes, and townhouses, right? And an ADU, the reason why we pulled the requirement for a 1 hour fire separation for an ADU is because as long as the ADU is freely communicating with the primary dwelling unit, and we interpret freely communicating, meaning that there's an interior doorway between the ADU and the primary dwelling unit. So the ADU is really kind of functioning like a mother-in-law's apartment. We decided that basically, or the IRC committee even decided that a fire separation is not relevant when an ADU is really functioning as a mother-in-law's apartment, right? And so likewise, in that scenario, there shouldn't be the burden of having to do sound attenuation between the ADU and the primary dwelling unit, all right? We further, in order to, you've heard all about, the housing situation in Anchorage and the push for more housing and more affordable housing. Really, that's what the rest of this is about, is that if you add an ADU to an existing dwelling, for this proposed amendment, you don't have to do sound attenuation. And likewise, if you actually go beyond an ADU, if you actually convert an existing dwelling into a duplex, you don't have to do sound attenuation. A person could argue that from either side, probably equally well, that, yeah, you should make them do sound attenuation, or no, you shouldn't make them do sound attenuation. Obviously, in scenarios where people are just trying to create a scenario where family members can live with them, aging adults can live with them, sound attenuation is not that big of a deal. And the cost of doing sound attenuation can really be onerous, especially when you got an over-under situation where you got to deal with the impact sound on the floor. That's really hard to address, the impact sound on the floor ceiling assembly. It would involve you taking down the ceiling or the sheetrock, putting up resilient channel, probably bad insulation in there, and then putting 5/8X or maybe even 2 layers of gypsum wallboard up to get the SDC ratings. And so that creates an affordability issue, it was felt. And so that's basically what this amendment's about. If there's any questions there.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, most walls, most existing walls, most of those things, they're already up to a 30 STC as existing. This was a most recent change that was kicking that all the way up to 45. Once it kicked it up to over 35 in that realm, it made it that you can't do it without sound, without resilient channel. You can't do it without a dense sound material, and you can't put that over top of the drywall that's there. You have to pull the drywall down, put it on the stud. So it made it very difficult to get to an STC of 45. And so we felt like the STC rating that's already sitting there existing is probably more than adequate. It's been more than adequate for 50 years in town, but only recently did they kicked it up to 45. And this is done, and this type of amendment is done all over the U.S. If you go online and look for it, it's done all over and allowed, just like what Ross wrote, which was existing cases and when there are ADU separations that meet that requirement. So it's pretty standard across the building industry, I would say.
All right, thank you. Board member comments, questions? I hear a lot. Mr. Boney, I would ask you as a architect with perhaps more experience in STC discussions than most of us, what your thoughts are on this.
Well, he's right. After you get up beyond 35, you know, getting into the 40s, that gets pretty heavy and onerous. Is this addressing new construction or existing construction?
Just two exceptions.
For accessory, it applies to all accessory dwelling units, whether they're a brand new house being built with an accessory dwelling unit or an existing house being converted to one. On duplexes, if you build a new duplex, you have to do sound attenuation. If you build new townhouses, you have to do sound attenuation. If you convert an existing home into a duplex, you would not have to do sound attenuation.
So this is only addressing existing construction.
For duplexes.
For duplexes.
And then all ADUs, period. If you qualify as an ADU, you would not have to do sound attenuation.
That would be new construction as well then.
Correct.
So in the future, if that ADU got turned into a non-ADU, a non-associated occupancy, then they would not have the acoustic separation in place.
I mean, like if they were to change the zoning codes that expanded what an ADU could be, I guess you could end up with, like if ADUs became wide open into duplexes, you could have a scenario then where you'd have this disconnect and you can build new duplexes without sound attenuation.
If I built a residence that is basically in-laws in the basement, primary residence above, with independent living rooms and kitchens and yada, 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 with a communicating stair, it would not be a trick really, if well planned, to be able to separate that off in the future to become a independent rental.
You could rent an ADU.
You can rent an ADU. You just can't rent both units in a single family residence with an ADU. You can't rent both units. Family member has to, the owner has to live in one of the units. So you can't, what I think you might be getting at is, can you take an ADU, turn it into a duplex? Well, zoning typically, most places where there's an ADU, it's because they only allow single family dwelling. So they have to be a single family with an ADU. They can't be a duplex. There's a few zoning districts that start getting into duplexes. But when they get into duplexes, they build a duplex because of the fact that they can get the money out of that. You don't see that many that can build a duplex where they only do a single family. Does that make sense? Because then you can rent both units out. But on an ADU right now, you have to be, they only are allowed as owner occupied.
And the owner has to sign an affidavit.
Yes, the owner has to record an affidavit and it's recorded on the property at the time that it's submitted to the muni for a permit. So it's always known at every home sale that that's an ADU, that it's not a duplex, because they have to have this affidavit. When they do the title search, they know it's not a duplex. As many people, Scott, have come in and tried exactly what you're talking about, but it's really easily preventable.
Right. So on the primary renter, or excuse me, primary owner, I occupy the upstairs. Well, I guess either way, I can rent the downstairs, whether it's an ADU So then it's,
But the
the
difference.
poor
is-
sucker in the bottom's gotta deal with my footsteps and not so much mine as my grandkids. They got heavy feet.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't follow the logic that if I build a new duplex, I have to have the sound attenuation, but if I remodel, that I don't.
Because it's a lot easier to do when you're building it from scratch.
Yeah, it's very easy to throw in the resilient channel when you're building that, than ripping everything out and rebuilding.
So I take it that we would do it for everything if it wasn't expensive. Wouldn't this kind of open us up that people that want to build duplexes would build them as single family and then a month later come in and want to convert it to a duplex to avoid that cost?
That's possible, but I don't think that the advantage is so great that you would cheat it that way.
If you're creating a duplex from a single family, then you're building new walls or some other type of structure scenario, right?
Sometimes you can, sometimes you don't.
Maybe some split
You know,
level
sometimes
things.
you got split level with a stair, and they just put a door at the bottom of the stair, and then they separate it. It's not that often that you see it because zoning prevents it, right? Most of the places that are zoned for the duplex, they build a duplex because it doesn't pay to build a single family on that. And so most of the time, it's just single families are where single family zoning is, duplexes are where duplex zoning is. Every once in a while, you find a lot big enough that can have a duplex on it. And so some people convert, but you know, there's so many more things with converted to a duplex too that makes it not done that often. And that if you had a furnace, you got to put a whole new mechanical system in for both units. You can't service electrical changes. There's a lot of other things that come into play that prevent it from doing that very often.
I guess my only question is that, so you're saying that this would still be allowed in new construction for single-family homes with an ADU in new construction, you would not need the sound attenuation?
Correct.
So I guess that would be, since we just said that it's easy to do when you're doing new construction, and the cost prohibition being renovations, why aren't we just making this limited to renovations?
Well, that brings an interesting point, actually. The first exception for ADUs actually doesn't even need to be here because the way the IRC committee wrote the amendment for ADUs in Chapter 3 of the IRC is basically if the ADU and the primary dwelling are freely communicating, it's not a two-family dwelling, it's a single-family dwelling. And because it's a single-family dwelling, you wouldn't even get to the sound attenuation chapter.
But the reason why the exception is there is because, well, it still can be an ADU, but not freely communicating. And then we have an ADU that's not freely communicating. And that's what the exceptions for when they don't put a door between the two. But then they have to update, put a 1 hour wall. So the odds are they're dealing with the 1 hour separation then because it's now a two-family dwelling, but still it's built like a two-family then in that case when they're not freely communicating. So it's just a little bit of a complex issue.
But I see your point that if it's new construction, you can just do it.
It's easier to do new construction than the retrofit later.
ADUs tend to be over 900 square feet, so people building homes that small and duplexes.
What was that?
There's a size requirement in ADUs. You can't be over 900 square feet. Is that correct?
They're 900 square feet in the normal zoning down in the kind of the bowl of acreage, but up on the hillside, they can be up to 35% of the main dwelling of the house, or the main principal house minus the garage. So if you had a really big house, you could build a fairly big, but that's still limiting, 35% of the main single family house.
I was wondering because there was you're talking about duplexes, I was under just the 900 square feet opinion, and I thought, wow, that's just doing something really small just to kind of skate the code just a little bit for sound barrier.
Yeah, I mean, duplexes could be any size. It's only the ADUs with the limitation.
So if we did not have exception number 1 on ADUs, what I'm hearing is that would effectively have make no difference, that wouldn't change it?
I think we need that in the cases that ADUs are built like the two-family dwelling, because it's still not a two-family dwelling. But Ross, we have a policy that says you build it like a two-family if you aren't freely communicating. The code says if you're not freely communicating, or if you're freely communicating, you're an ADU that doesn't have a rated separation. But if you take and make an ADU and don't put the door in between, now you have to build it, even though it's single family and ADU, you build it, and we have to upgrade it and make the 1 hour rating go in. And so in that case, when we make the 1 hour rating, that's when we're just saying in that case, you wouldn't have to do the sound attenuation, because you're having to, you typically don't pull the drywall off to do that. Typically, you might add another layer to get, if you had ½ inch on both sides, you might have to add another layer, ½ inch, to get to your 1 hour separation in that case. If that makes sense to you, right? But because you can't get a 1 hour with most houses are done with ½ inch drywall. You can't get to a 1 hour separation with ½ inch on each side. So in those cases that they can turn in a single family to a duplex, or a single family with an ADU that they don't have it freely communicating, we're going to add more drywall to that anyway, which makes the sound better without having to pull it off and meet the sound attenuation of 45. You're still going to get up to 35 to 40 somewhere in there with that 1 hour wall, no matter what.
In the case you're talking about, would that not be covered under exception 2, existing wall and floor ceiling assemblies? If you're talking about converting an existing.
Yeah, number 2 would apply to any existing wall or floor ceiling assembly, whether it's an ADU or a duplex.
Do you feel that's interpreted, Ross, that we wouldn't need that for the case that we don't have a freely communicating? Would it cover that exception that item 2 would cover?
Only for existing, right? For accessory dwelling units that aren't freely communicating, those basically get constructed as two-family dwellings, duplexes.
But it could be in an existing building.
But if it's existing, for any existing wall or floor ceiling assembly, they don't have to address sound attenuation, period.
If Ross is fine with B saying that, then I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that.
I mean, here's the way.
I think for consistency, to Mr. Green's point, if it's new construction, and that's the reason we're discussing this, so it's easier to do construction, we should stick with that.
And so you're thinking about deleting the first exception?
That means.
So, if the wall's there, and to get the 1 hour separation, they're not freely communicating, would you still feel that's just the existing wall and floor ceiling assembly, or that's a new floor ceiling assembly because you're adding new drywall to get it to the 1 hour?
Well, this is just the sound attenuation. It's not the rating issue.
Right, but that's what I'm hearing is it's an existing wall floor ceiling assemblies. We are now, in that case, we are creating a new assembly.
Like new construction?
Yeah, well, because, right, you have a ½ inch on each side, and to get to 1 hour, you have to add a new ½ inch layer on each side. So
I would say you're not building a new assembly.
Okay, as long as
you're just adding
as long as
a layer of drywall.
You deal with it a lot more. I just want to make sure.
No, the exception number 2 just means existing construction, period. Like you're going to take a basement and you're going to make that basement an ADU.
Okay.
There's an existing floor
So
ceiling
then we can
assembly.
get rid of 1,
got a couple things that, as you talk, I can think about this. If you've got a lot that's zoned duplex, not too often are you seeing an ADU built, I assume that then
No,
you're building duplex, the return is higher.
Yeah, it's,
So this is basically something that is built on single-family residents are 1, 2, 3 lots, I assume.
For the most
For the
part,
most part.
but there could be exceptions. but yes.
And most of those are duplexes allowed then?
They'd have to be allowed by zoning. There's
And
only
most
2
large
zoning
duplexes
districts.
aren't allowed.
So most zoning
Right,
districts,
Russ? What did you say?
I think he's gonna say the same thing. I think most lots, duplexes are not allowed, right? There's probably a lot more single-family lots out there than duplex lots.
That's where I'm coming from.
yes,
You got a lot of them that are not gonna allow duplexes.
correct.
ADUs are gonna be permitted, but duplexes are not. So putting this provision in is requiring a lot of construction costs up front to put in duplex provisions where duplex isn't required.
I'm not following that.
Yeah, if you're dealing on a single family lot where a duplex is not required, but you're gonna build it as an ADU.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily want to require this additional sound protection in that instance because it cannot be converted.
You
To a
wouldn't have
duplex.
to because it's an ADU, it's a single family with an ADU, you wouldn't have to.
Right, it's gonna be either a single family or it's gonna be an ADU. It cannot go duplex.
Correct.
So it's not necessary to put in this requirement for
That's
that,
why Ross
for
is
this
saying,
lion's share of the buildings there.
that's why Ross is saying you could eliminate item 1, because it is a single family with an ADU that it would be exempt from it because it's a single family.
I think by the way to look at this is Anchorage is mostly built, right? And so what we're mostly seeing is existing single-family homes being converted to ADUs. That's the most common scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that the board didn't say, well, it's easier to do it in new construction, so let's just do it. It's not necessary because that isn't going to fall in play. Sounds like somebody's got their hand up.
They do. Mr. Hickle has his hand up.
Before we move to a motion on this, Mr. Hickle, what do you have to say?
Well, I think there needs to be some clarification. So let's say I have a single family home and I'm going to put an ADU in it. And we're talking about not putting in sound insulation because it's too costly. I have to put in separate plumbing, mechanical, electrical systems in this entire thing. And you're telling me I'm not gonna remove enough drywall to do that I can't put in the sound attenuation. I'm not catching it here. So if you could clarify that, I don't see how it would be cost prohibitive.
Okay, well, thank you for the comment. I'll ask the question. Is that, if you're converting to an ADU, is that a requirement to separate systems?
No, so if they're freely communicating, like we were talking about earlier, there's a doorway an interior doorway between the ADU and the primary dwelling unit. It's treated as a single family dwelling. So you don't have to have separate forced air heat. You don't have to have the 2 separate panels so to have access to the overcurrent devices. The smoke detectors are all going to be interlocked and sound together. And yeah.
What if there's not a opening between two?
So then they would be, in that case, it would be a 2-family dwelling, and all those things apply. You couldn't share the forced air heating system between the 2 units. Each dwelling would have to have access to their electrical panel, and yeah.
Ownership as well.
Yep.
Clarification question on that. If you had a split entry, that's the one door in, and you've got one door that is, because that would be the conversion of the downstairs into an ADU.
Mm-hmm.
They have one door, they have the 2 doors that are really open in between the 2.
That would be an interior access way.
ADUs need a exterior access point because they get a different address. So
Okay,
you
so I
have to put in you got to put in a exterior access to an ADU by zoning code and get a separate address. And so most of those addresses come in at, you'll start seeing them, they come in at an address with a 0.5 on it. So if you're like 1720, it's 1720.5 for the ADU.
You could still have the interior picture too, though.
Okay, so it sounds like in summary, that it's,
Another hand
Another
is
hand
down.
popped up.
okay, yeah. But to summarize what was just said, and to Mr. Hickle's comment, that it does not sound like it typically is the case that you need to tear out plumbing, open up walls already. If you're converting to
Could
an
be,
ADU.
I mean, if they don't have a kitchen, if they don't have a bathroom, and then they have to put it in, then I think that's when it's all open or not. If it's open, we end up doing most of these things, but when it's not open, is existing, I mean, that's what we're talking about, when it's not really kind of, and so.
All right, thank you.
Exceptions.
We have another hand up online.
Victor?
Yeah, just to clarify what my understanding is, it's where you first talked about a common entry. We would treat that electrically normally as a common entry and would be common space compared to the two units. But with the way the amendment's being written, that if it's communicates, then it is all clearly one structure, one single family dwelling. So the wiring would be not separated. So even if they added a kitchen, as was just mentioned, that would could all still come out of the same panel, which the other ADU person has no access to, with the way that's being crafted right now. It would be built electrically, just like it was a single family dwelling, as under the assumption that everyone has access to every piece of equipment they need anywhere in that structure, which is what is different from how it is currently.
And for my clarification, the item that we're talking about in the ordinance deals only with STC. There was a previous item that dealt with the single family versus two family. Are we combining discussions here a little bit on those two topics?
Yeah, I think this is evolving.
Yeah. All right, so to bring this back and focus primarily on the STC, I'd like to entertain a motion on how we'd like to address this item. Would like to recommend this or otherwise.
How did you say this? We don't need, what was it, exception one?
That's been the discussion. Yeah.
That's not, this isn't the exception one, no.
It'd be implicit in the code to be not needed, but it could be better to have it. Right? We know that it's like we already did before.
It'd be simple just to say existing wall or ceiling assembly.
It's great when we're interpreting it and we interpret it that way. We want to make sure that it's very clear that this is intended to be good. And so as long as we feel like that will always be interpreted that way by taking it out. But I can see
There's no harm in leaving it in, knowing it solves what may solve the future argument.
Mm-hmm.
If no harm in keeping it in, and it may solve some future argument, is that what you're saying?
kind of like the argument of the audit. Right.
Yes.
That's the exact same statement.
I was thinking the same parallel, so I'll make a motion to accept section 24 as written.
And as a friendly modification at section 26 is the one we're talking about. Section 24 was the one that's been withdrawn, dealing with.
Oh, did I read the wrong one?
The two family.
Okay, 26, I stand corrected. Excuse me.
Somebody's still awake.
Do I have a second? I'll second. All right. Any further discussion on the topic? Yes, Mr. Kelly.
I feel like as we eliminate the sound issues, they're going to feel like we're not bound to wire it in accordance with the separation. So I'm kind of a little confused on the definitions of ADU, the access, and I did some research on what other municipalities are doing, and many of them have written up entire booklets on this topic because I think there's a lot of ancillary implications that happen when you start dealing with ADUs. I don't think it's really part of the duplex situation, but ADUs in particular, about the accessibility, not accessible, especially with the breakers. I know it doesn't have anything to do with the sound, but when you say that there's just a door there, so it's just like another space, if you can rent that out to somebody else, it seems to me that you've got a situation where you can lock that door and they don't have access to the breakers to shut something off if there's a malfunction and something's catching fire in their unit. And it also would, it feels like to me, cause that the smoke detectors wouldn't be wired separately if it's freely communicating between the two spaces. So I feel like there's some implications here that are being affected that we haven't thought through.
I would say Victor has discussed this quite a bit. He could answer that too, but Ross has a written policy, Ross, or handout that covers this. We have a document that clarifies all that. I believe that we've had several meetings in the house talking with the electrical staff, and everybody is pretty much in agreement with Victor helped us understand all the electrical requirements that he would be looking for in the. He's online. I think he could probably maybe go into and answer your concerns there.
Yeah, he's got his hand up. Let's see what
Real
he
quick,
says.
before we answer that, I do want to make sure we're on the same page. We're not talking about any of that for this motion. This motion purely deals with sound attenuation. The only reason these questions are coming up is because our discussion has raised unrelated questions on ADU. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
So let's answer that question, but first let's vote on this motion so we can address this, and then I'd like to hear the response to that question. So any further discussion on the specific topic of STC ratings and item section 26 as currently proposed? Hearing none, Tana, would you please call the question on this item?
Certainly. Mr. Straight?
Yes.
Mr. Frudin? Mr. Cowley?
Yes.
Mr. Boney?
Yes.
Mr. Benoit?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to throw it to Victor, if you would please respond to Mr. Cowley's question and clarify this for us. I'm curious as well.
Make sure I hit the right one. Well, my understanding was just what I had said before, that if it communicates with that door, then it would be wired. We would enforce that it would be wired like a single family dwelling. Am I incorrect in that, Ross?
No, that's correct.
Yeah. So that would mean just what Eric was speaking to is basically with that communicating door, then that is wired just like a house. So if that person is truly using that ADU portion as another apartment, then they wouldn't have access to the breaker the way it would, the break, or they may have the actual house panel in their apartment and the other person can't get to that. The way it's written now, the way we enforce it now is we make them wire it like it's a duplex, whether it's an existing structure or not. But this would mean, no, that person doesn't incur that cost of having to make sure there's a separation electrically between the units, the dwelling units. Electrically, we would treat it all like one dwelling unit. So yeah, if someone chose to not give someone access through that door, they do not have access to that panel.
Victor, to clarify, the way you're discussing it, if I understood you right, the way you discussed this was that we were making a change that was affecting electrical in some way. And my understanding is what we're talking about today has nothing to do with electrical. Can you clarify that?
Well, my understanding is that they're defining, the change in the definition is to say that when it has a communicating door, you treat it completely like a single family dwelling, not just for sound attenuation, but for all the mechanical and electrical systems. That's not currently how it is in the code, how we look at it when we inspect those. As soon as it becomes an ADU, it is another dwelling unit. So then we electrically, it must be wired like another dwelling unit. So like a duplex, meaning that person or both people must have access to their overcurrent device. You cannot have shared circuits. You can't have a circuit that goes, from one unit and then run some of the things in the other unit. You must have separation in your smoke detectors. You don't allow any type of sharing electrical between the two dwelling units. The new definition would say, no, it is not two dwelling units. It is one single family dwelling.
We haven't suggested any changes today that make any change in what the code is today or will be after this is adopted. So what's in, right, Ross? We pulled that item 24 and are not changing.
If I understood the discussion around that, the reason you pulled 24 is because it was redundant. It was essentially reinforcing what's already in the code, which kind of comes back to our previous discussion of it, unless the person's explicit. But is your understanding that today, as it's written, if there's a communication between an ADU and a single-family home, as I understood the discussion earlier, they can be electrically wired together. They don't need to be electrically separated, which is different than what Victor is saying is the current situation.
What it is currently today.
Which is?
It's already in code.
Which?
The not freely communicating with a ADU and a single family freely communicating is in code today. We didn't change anything today because we pulled item 24 that was removing that language. Therefore, what's in place today will remain in place and will be in place when this code goes through the assembly. We're not asking you guys to look or change at that effect at all.
Correct. We're not today making any change, any discussion. That's off the table. But for my knowledge, as it is today, if you have a communication between a single-family residence and an ADU, are they required to be electrically separate, or can they be electrically?
If they freely communicate, they're allowed to be built as a single-family home and wired as a single-family home on both sides with interconnecting smoke detectors, wiring the same mechanical systems, a single shut-off, and as long as they're freely communicating. Once they're not freely communicating, then that changes, and they build it like a duplex. And they build a separate.
But it's still called an ADU.
But they still call it an ADU.
Great. Okay. Always frame the door.
Yeah. So that.
All right. So
that's how the code is written. That's how we intend to keep it. And we believe that we're not changing anything to that effect at all.
Okay.
I feel like
through the chair.
Good, Victor.
Well, technically correct. You're not changing anything, but you're redefining what freely communicating is. A door is not allowed, right? If a door is there, it's not freely communicating, is how it's been interpreted.
October Code Amendment Committee, the IRC put that amendment in a year and a half ago.
All right, well, I think we've stumbled into a point of.
We can solve that in-house. That's a in-house issue. It's not a code issue. We're not changing it. That was put in code prior to, it was prior to the October of 2020's code change.
I think if nothing else, we've covered it. There is still uncertainty and some lack of clarity around ADUs. So I would encourage you to discuss it. I understand you have a handout. Maybe some more clarification would be helpful on that.
Perfect.
And an acoustical door is the issue. It's the locking.
No one's got stop.
Please.
Is what I noticed in the other jurisdictions that reading what they were seeming to trying to address was there's a big difference between if you have a grandmother living in this ADU versus a rentable unit that you're renting to someone that you don't know. So it is freely accessible if grandma's in there. You don't lock her out. But if you're renting to somebody that answered an ad in the paper, you lock that door. You're not going to allow that free access. So if you're in Florida for the week and their breakers trip, they don't have access. So it's not meeting the intent of the code. So they worked pretty hard at defining how deep the sink was or how big the refrigerator could be. There was a lot of things they did to try to differentiate between grandmother living down there and a rentable unit is what I kind of caught.
You're exactly right. I've seen the same. I've seen it done 15 different ways across the country. They all do it differently. Every jurisdiction tries to do what's best for their zoning and their building codes. And so I agree. We will continue to strive to work with. I don't think there's been any question. I mean, I think Victor and them have done what's right with the, we can what if a lot of things, and what if is going to happen depending on how it goes. Right now, the law is that we have an ADU with a single family, and it's a single family, and we're not asking to change that. You know, doesn't mean that we won't, based upon a conversation, come with another code change down the road and be back and discuss it. I think they bring up good points, but right now that's not really what we're trying to change. We felt like we were trying not to change it for that reason, because whatever's happening now is happening and has been for years without a big question. So, but
I believe is what my concern is that we're missing the point that I believe the way the Muni has interpreted it previously, and I could be wrong. I have dealt with very few ADUs, but if there was an ADU, we went at it and wired it as a separate for smoke alarms, breaker access. It was separated. So it just seems like to me, you're now saying it's a single family. They won't be separated any longer. So this change of what you're doing here is about STC, but I believe it directly affects the way that we're going to wire these and enforce that. And I would contend incorrectly that it's basically causing a code violation electrically.
But if you turn it into a rental, you moved it out of an ADU into a duplex, didn't you?
No, you can rent an ADU. That's the whole idea of an ADU. And so that's why I believe that if you have an ADU, you have to make the modifications to make it illegal.
Free access to the services panels.
Exactly.
It's not how it was currently interpreted.
But that's what he's saying is not.
Yeah, that's what keeps it real electric.
That's what we do every day, is try to analyze things that are done correctly, and I think we can handle the enforcement of the way the language is written properly, and we will continue to. So we'll work with, and if we need to make a change, we'll come forward with a change in the future. But right now, the reason for ADUs isn't to go rewire the whole house. The intent of the ADUs, the basis behind them, and the owner living there, is that they're supposed to have access and to the items that they deal with. So
bottom line is, this is a staff issue at this point.
Yeah.
This issue is not before the board. Staff has time to work this out, so.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, and as we are planning on meeting in 2 weeks, I'll be asking about where we stand, because I'd like to know what the. It sounds like there's been confusion about interpretation in the past, so it'd be good to have clarification. All right, and with that, I believe we're all the way through item number 5.
We have a motion on this.
We voted on it.
We passed 5-0.
Motion is passed.
All right.
Old business is complete.
So it's only
So,
there.
Everything is completed except.
No pressure, Greg, but it's all what you
I let you guys all down.
We could have been done, but.
All right, item 6, reports. Anything from staff you want to report on? Beyond what's been discussed.
I would say that the only thing that really happened since the last meeting is the budget was passed, but then you guys probably saw the mayor vetoed some items. The issue we talked at the last meeting about the building inspectors that were laid off, the assembly put them back in, and then the mayor But anyway, if you follow that, I believe the process now is they have 21 days from the date of the veto to override the veto, but they also have to have that done within 21 days of the end of the fiscal year. So that puts it, I believe, by December 10th. So if you want to watch what happens with that, you'll find out whether or not there was quite a bit of discussion with regard to my position as I described it. When they, at the end of the discussion, they voted 11-0 to keep it. So there was some questioning, concern about it, but it ended up being added, it kept in, and they felt that there was a value for what was going on. So at the end of the day, right now, I don't know what will happen finally, but what's going on is also the reorganization for the mayor's executive team, which includes my position and our organization, is on the assembly agenda on Tuesday. So if you watch that, you'll find out whether or not the reorg for the mayor's executive, then that kind of solidifies the exact description of how I said the department was set up last meeting. And so I believe by next Friday, we'll kind of know everything that's in play. I think the budget will be in place, or if they make any more changes or change anything. But at this time, we're waiting, and I believe they have to pass that by next Friday. So we'll see what ends up happening. And then, so in 2 weeks, we'll probably have a little bit better description, because then after the budget, then after the mayor's organizational change, that's when we will go through our reorganization to put all the people and positions and layout of the department in place. And so that will take a little bit more time. And so we also, I don't know if I mentioned, we signed the contract for our building permitting software. I think it was in the last week or so. And so that by April 30th, we have a deadline to revamp all of that. We also just went, I believe we're going live tomorrow to allow people to do re-roof permits, to pull re-roof permits online, just like retro permits. So they won't have to come in here at all. They can pull their re-roof for residential only. They'll be able to pull permits online, pay for them, print them out, and not have to come into the counter. So that should free up a huge amount of staff time at the front counter. And so there's some the Title 21 changes that go along with these go through P&Z on Monday. So Monday they'll be done, then this will probably be done next Tuesday, and then we'll go to the assembly. So it'll probably be sometime the first meeting in January for these. And if and when that goes, I mean, it's nice to see most of the things that we've gone through now have been unanimously approved by you. That's the whole point here. And then hopefully then we can have a resolution from you guys that we will put an S version together. I think Ross already has most of the S version written that has done all the things that you guys have agreed upon or we've agreed to pull out. So I think we'll be able to send that around to you as soon as we're ready. And then we'll be substituting the ordinance that after the AAVs will wait, but that'll be the substitution ordinance for the one as it is based upon what you guys have done in the last couple months. So that's kind of where we are right now. We are looking for a building official. We have accepted and hired pending assembly approval of planning director. So I don't know if you know Craig Lyons. Michelle is leaving planning, but Craig Lyons will be coming over. So that's a good fit for, and so if you guys know anybody interested in a building official position, we are looking to fill the building official position as soon as possible. And so, the requirements right now needs to be an engineer. Supposed to be with preferred civil structural, but any engineer can be substituted. So if you guys know anybody or have any ideas, let us know. We're looking for someone that's willing to come in here and take over that role. But that's kind of what's happening so far.
What's permit turnaround right now?
Well, Ross could cover permit turnaround. Our valuation is about 85% or 84% of last year. So it's down about 15%, which is sitting at about 370, I think 370 million. Last year we did 460 million or something like that. So we'll see if we can pull closer up to that number by the end of the year. I don't know, but Ross, you can probably cover a turnaround.
It kind of depends on the scope of the project. I mean, smaller stuff get turned around in just a day or two. But, you know, newer projects, like the structural list today, there's nothing on there over 2 weeks, you know, it's been in for 2 weeks or more.
Inspection, you guys are still doing what, 98% same day?
Yeah, mechanical wise, yeah, I mean, the rentals are, we're busy in that aspect of it.
Victor, how are you holding up with losing Eric as far as inspection turnaround?
You mean, we only lost Nathan, right? So, we still have Eric, but obviously we have more leftovers. We're keeping up with them. I mean, we're getting them done, and inspection wise, it's about the same as it's greater than it was last year, but it's within what has been the average over the last 6 years or even over the last 10 years. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Staff?
Would it be possible to do you want us to wait until we have the S? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is if that S version is ready in 2 weeks, would we be able to vote on the S version? Or is the S version created after I don't, let's get timing.
So this is the, I'll get you an answer on that because the way that this was submitted to the assembly first, rather than to you first, how we go about what we need, whether it's a resolution to support a revision to be the S version, or whether we say a resolution that addresses each of the sections as you guys dealt with them. I don't know, I'll find out how to, I mean, we know your guys' response to them. We'll find out exactly how legal wants us to put that forward. I think that you're correct. If you can get the AAV language that you think you need, and we finalize this, I think it would be cleanest, hopefully, that would be the way that would be acceptable, that you would write a resolution that just says we accept the S version as is. You know, then we can resubmit, they can amend in the S version, and then all of a sudden it's much cleaner, right? And so that would be ideal, I think. I just don't know. Normally we submit this through you first, right? This was done differently than I've ever done it. It's almost always submitted to the building board first and then goes to the assembly. And so we've never run into the way that we're doing this. But because it's kind of the reverse, I got to find out how we go about doing that. And so I'll have that language. What we'll try to do is, knowing that answer, I'll have a document or maybe we can create a resolution that matches whatever way we have to do it. Or if it's the S version, we just have the S version by the next meeting. That probably help.
Or if we had the S version, even if we change that one, we could adopt the S version with this revision, and then you slide it in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I want to make it the easiest and the most simplified to follow, but I've never done it this way, so I don't know the exact answer of which way we have to do it. I would hope we could just do the S version, bam, throw it through, resubmit it, but there's rules that we have to play through the process doing it this way. And being that I haven't done it, I can't say tonight, but I will have that for you in 2 weeks.
Great. Further questions or comments from the board? Thank you very much for your report. Last item, board member comments, anything in general? Anything we want to get off the chest? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate all of you being part of this.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Yeah, no, we appreciate the time and effort, you know, it's over and above what you normally do, so we really appreciate it. And Scott, you've been doing this, how long have you been doing this?
Oh, that's time.
Huh?
Yes, Tana.
It's in your book.
I think you had a full head of hair when you started.
I lost that real, I had hair when I got here.
Oh, no, yep, oh, four. Of course.
Through it. Almost there.
Yeah, you were here